Hello and welcome to Roll for Topic, a roundtable discussion about topics related to running role-playing games. I'm Chris Salzman,
And I'm Andy Rao.
and this week we are joined by two very special guests. We have Tim Saucer with us,
Hi, I'm Tim.
and we have Liz Decker.
Hi, I'm Liz.
Thank you so much for coming on. So we have corralled you into coming on this podcast to talk about running games for kids. So this is something that I think, let's see, we all have kids here. I guess I have a 7-year-old and a 2-year-old. Let's see, I know, Liz, that you work with some children and run like an actual RPG club for them as well.
Yeah.
Tim, you've got a couple kids, and you've got a couple kids. This is something that is near and dear to all of our hearts. Is like, yeah, how do we make our kids and the kids in our lives sort of be involved in this hobby that we love so much? So, we thought that this would be a good opportunity to sit down and just sort of have like a little bit of a discussion about like how that's worked for us in the past, and like, yeah, just some tips and tricks and strategies and all that sort of stuff. As I mentioned, so I have a 7-year-old and a 2-year-old. So the 2-year-old obviously not super interested in gaming right now. The 7-year-old, however, has just fallen hard for Pokemon, and so her eyes are starting to open up towards like this wide world of like, oh, there's like these games that I can play, and I can pretend in them and that sort of stuff. And we actually just had a conversation yesterday about like Dungeons and Dragons too. She was just like mentioning like there was a Teen Titans Go episode that she had seen where they were playing Dungeons and Dragons. She was like, oh, like there's that game that they play in that show. I was like, yeah, like Daddy plays that game. We could play sometime if you wanted to. So it was a cool moment for me. But all right, so I'll stop rambling here, but I'm gonna kick it over to you, Andy. Why don't you talk about like, yeah, your kids and what your experience is with running games for kids?
I have two kids. I have an 11-year-old and I have a 15-year-old, and gaming in different forms has been a thing I've done with them since they were quite young. My gaming with kids history is playing with my group of adult gaming friends. At some point, they started having kids like before I did, and so at some point, some of their older kids started to join our games, and so I quickly realized that a kid at the table is a wonderful additional presence at the table that also changes a little bit the way that you want to run games. And then as my kids got old enough to start grasping games, I found that we had a lot of board games and other games with cool pieces and cool tiles and boards and stuff that I found it was pretty easy to add to the experience of that game some sort of role-playing element to make the game better. Because a lot of these games for kids are not very interesting, not very exciting, even for an adult to play. So adding that element of like giving the kid a little bit of additional choice about what they're doing, introducing a little bit more, some dice rolling or something tactile like that, added a lot to that. And at least with my 15-year-old, that has evolved into a point where my 15-year-old is played in a lot of games that I've run. They're in a long-running game with a bunch of their peers. And so that's been pretty rewarding to see. So that's my kind of gaming with kids in a nutshell. Let me turn it over to, let's start with Liz. Liz, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself and what your experiences and running games with and for kids?
Yeah. So I actually didn't start playing D&D till it was 2018. I think like the end of 2018. And then I started running for kids in 2019.
Wow.
I came across I was a baby DM. I had no idea what I was doing. I had a really great group of kids who were okay with none of us really knowing what we were doing. But yeah, so I started with RPG Club, which had already been in progress in 2019. And I've been with it since then. It's really been an interesting journey because I play with a group of friends outside of school, and then I play with high school age players with RPG Club. And it's a really interesting way to see the game because there are some students who come into club and they could pretty much know all the source books cover to cover, inside out, backwards and forwards. And there are some students who have never rolled a D20 before. And so you're kind of trying to balance all these different experience levels. But one thing that is consistent I've seen with all teenage players is just they all really just want to be playing, and they want to be exploring characters, and they want to be having adventures and being awesome. And so there's this energy with RPG Club that is really, really special, which I see sometimes playing with my adult friends, but with RPG Club in particular, it's a really special energy that is really fun to play with and really fun to kind of lead and, empower teenagers to be DMs, but then also empower teenagers to feel confident being different kinds of characters.
That's fantastic. Tim, can you tell us a little bit about your history of gaming with kids?
I think about 4 years ago, I realized I wanted to get back into playing role-playing games. And mostly I wanted to share the experience with my children. So I started up a D&D group of kids from my neighborhood. So I had 5 kids from my neighborhood basically come over to my house about once a week or so, go into the basement, and I would run Dungeons and Dragons for them. Campaign ran for a little over a year. We wrapped that one up. Started another one, had a total party kill. So I started another one like on session 2. So we started another one, and then that one went for a while. But the other thing I've done is I have a summer camp. Well, I used to have a summer camp. This is my first year not doing it in 8 years. And I started a RPG session there. And one year I did a 1-page RPG that I wrote that was like themed around the camp. You know, it's like all the NPCs were their actual counselors, like that were there. So that was a lot of fun for them. And then last year we had a space theme. So we did Death in Space, or I'm sorry, we did Lasers and Feelings that time. I was thinking I did Death in Space with my kids, is a game that we ran New Year's Eve waiting for the ball to drop. So I still occasionally run some games for my kids. But the other time I run for teenagers now is when my work group does D&D about once a month. A bunch of us do bring our teenagers there. So we usually have them. So it's a mixture of adults and teenagers at that sessions.
That's wonderful. Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to toss out a question or two just that we can kind of bounce around as a group here. I don't know, maybe this is a slightly awkward storytelling time, but I'm wondering if you guys could share a mistake or a misstep that you did while gaming with kids that taught you something about the experience. And just to get us started, so it's maybe slightly less awkward, I'll share my big mistake. I will never forget the evening I made a kid break down in tears at the game because it was my first lesson that this kid is here to get something out of the game that is a little bit different than everybody else at the table. We were just playing regular old D&D. It wasn't anything super intense, but basically he missed like 4 rolls in a row. So you know how in D&D you can kind of get into that trap of like you wait 10 minutes and then you roll your 1 die and then you miss and then you have to wait 10 minutes again. That's what was happening. And that's not fun, but the adult players at the table are usually able to laugh it off, or kind of you can start kind of cracking jokes at your own bad rolls. But in this case, it was a young teenage age kid, and they weren't interested in kind of laughing and being lighthearted about their failure. They were experiencing that as like the least fun 25 minutes of their life. So that was actually the first time. That was when my adult friends were starting to bring their kids to the game table, and that was what made me first realize I need to be a little more thoughtful going forward about how I run games and how I pay attention to people's experience at the table. So does anyone else want to volunteer a failing or a lesson?
Andy, I'm just real curious, Andy. So like when the child started to cry, what did you do? Did you make them roll again to see if they actually succeeded, or did you stop the game? What was your reaction?
I don't really remember. I just remember it being about the most awkward couple of minutes of my entire life.
Yes.
Because the parents were there at the table too, and so there was a lot of
yeah.
Well, and you didn't, if I understand the timeline, you didn't have children yourself at that point, right?
Not really gaming age kids at that time, no. So
yeah.
Well, and I think that's probably really important, especially for people that that don't interact with children frequently, either through their profession or being a parent themselves. I think that's a very common thing to not realize, to not put yourself in the place of the children to see how they would experience that.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
I think Liz was going to say something.
Yeah, I took bad notes when we were sharing backstories and forgot a pretty critical character, and I had thought I had everything from a student's backstory, and they had put a lot of thought into all these really important people, and I planned this whole adventure and at some point missed writing down a name that was a pretty big catalyst for someone's journey, and I think I apologized to the student and made sure they knew, oh, I'm so sorry, and we can make this work, and let me go back and think a little bit about the story. And I sort of fixed some of my own timeline things and some of the trajectories. But I think in that moment, I thought I'd gotten it all, and I missed something, and it happened to be a really important name in this student's backstory for their character, and it did affect for a minute kind of the energy of the session. But I think I was also worried because this was a new player who had obviously really gotten excited about thinking about where their character came from, and I just felt so bad for getting some other things that in retrospect were not important about their backstory, but then missing something that was pretty important. And it all resolved okay.
Yeah.
But there were a couple sessions where it was like, oh yeah, okay, we're getting over a little bit of this awkwardness of, I want to like, value this work you put in. And I'm trying to kind of fix some stuff that I had
Yeah.
planned because I forgot you had this character that you told me you had. So
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, that was not my best moment as a DM. So for
Oh,
sure.
that's super interesting. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Tim, our eyes are shifting over to you.
Yeah. My worst one. It wasn't like a specific moment, but there were like a couple sessions very early on when I was running the group for my neighborhood kids, where I realized I was getting like really frustrated with these kids, and they were having a great time though. Like they kept talking about, telling their parents about what a great time they were having, and I kept getting more and more frustrated. And it just goes to that I was not setting my expectations correctly, right? Because I was thinking about how I would engage with this game and not how the kids want to, right? Because I like to run a pretty serious, epic fantasy campaign type thing, with like memorable NPCs and big bad villains and heroic moments or whatever. And they want to slash things in a funny way,
Yeah.
and their way of enjoying themselves is perfectly right and valid and appropriate for their age. But I was bringing a set of expectations that were inconsistent with what the game needed to be for them to have a maximally enjoyable time. So yeah, it wasn't like one specific incident, but it was like the second and third sessions I ran for that group. I was just getting more and more frustrated. Like after the third one, I was like, I think I'm just going to end this thing.
Mhm.
And then my kids were like, no, it's so much fun. You
Yeah.
can't end it. And I was like, okay, I just need to reset my expectations here. So have any of you had that problem, or is it just me?
Oh yeah,
Mhm.
I've had that a couple times, and I think that's a pretty important part of running games with kids is managing expectations that way. Because I've had similar moments where it's like, there is no way anyone is having fun, and then everyone's having the best time, but they want to stay after RPG Club is over and talk about all the cool stuff. And I'm like, we didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Nothing happened. So yeah, I think managing expectations is really important for like remembering like
Mhm.
they'll let you know if they're not having fun. I think that's the thing. If they're bored, they will tell you. If they're not having fun, they will tell you. And if they're laughing, then they're like, having a good time, then
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah, I wonder, like, working with, like, when you're playing with adults, I feel like adults, you can expect them to modulate their expectations based on like what's actually happening at the table. I remember the first time I tried to play any sort of like imagination game with my daughter, right? Like I was like, hey, let's play D&D. Like, so I think I even got out like all my stuff. I was like, I'm gonna set up the screen, I'm gonna give you dice, like I'm gonna like do the whole thing. And she was just like so confused, like what's
Did
what's going on, right? And we're trying to tell this like little story together. And I'm like,
did
I'm
wait?
set.
She started with the 4d6 method for her stats, right?
Of course she did, right?
Just
I'm raising
level
her
setting.
right. Yeah.
Your listeners want to know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'm just making sure we establish the important facts.
Yes.
And there was a possibility their character would die during character creation, right?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. I mean,
keeping
we
it
went through
old
the whole
school.
thing, top to bottom.
Okay.
But yeah, but I mean, I had this expectation, right? Like, it's like Tim, kind of to your point of like, oh, we're gonna play for like an hour. This is gonna be great. And we're like 3 minutes in, and she's already like wants to go do something else. It's just like, right? It's like it's not like she's not having fun. It's just her attention span is lower, right? So I think like having like matching those. I mean, this is just anytime you're interacting with kids, having that like adult to child expectations and kind of finding the middle ground is always super important. But I think especially with gaming, because like it does feel like it's a very tender thing too. Like you don't want to turn someone off from the hobby at a young age because you sort of like ran it wrong for them at the time. Right. And then they're like, whenever D&D comes up later on in their life, they're like, oh yeah, I tried that with my dad once. I didn't like it. Right. Like, it's like, oh no, geez, I just like, I don't want to screw that up.
So based on my much more limited than you guys experience running games for kids, one of the things I kind of have come away from it with is, how in like some RPG rule books, there will be a section of like, these are the different kinds of gamers that you might get at your table. There's like the people that are here to really engage with the rules and push the numbers around, and they'll memorize all the modifiers and the bonuses, and that's what's exciting to them. Then there's the people that are really into just role playing their character in a really immersive way, and different personality types. And I've been reading that section in role playing game rule books all my life. It wasn't until I started playing more with kids that I felt like I really saw those very clearly different approaches that were personality. I don't want to say personality types, but ways of engaging the game. And I'm wondering if, particularly Tim and Liz, if you can talk about what are sort of the different common ways that kids come to the table. Like what kind of experience are they looking to get out of the game?
Well, I'll share a story. A kid moved in down the street, and so I had wrapped up a couple campaigns, and I was going to start a new one with my younger son and just some of his friends. And a kid moved in down the street, and I found out that he was like a week older than my kid. And I was like, "Oh, we're just about to start this D&D group. You're new to the neighborhood. Do you think your son might want to come play?" And they said, "Oh my God, he's obsessed with D&D. Yes, we would love for him to come play." I was like, "Okay, cool. Just pick a character, come over, and we'll do this thing." And the very first thing he said, "Okay, I need you all to look out because it takes me 10 minutes to don my gear per the player's handbook." And I was
Oh
like,
yes.
"Oh my gosh, you really like nailed that stereotype
Yes.
100%."
Oh wow.
Like
Yeah.
you nailed it perfectly. So I've definitely had that experience that you're talking about. how's the school group? What are the kids like there?
Oh my gosh, we have some kids who have played D&D for years and know
Mhm.
everything you could possibly know about 5e. Some know other versions of D&D as well, so they bring a lot of this knowledge in. And then we have some kids, like I said, that really have never done anything except they recently learned about it, want to try it. And I think one of the models I try to model for them how to talk to other players and how to interact with other players in moments that feel tricky, like when you're thinking about whether or not a new player should be expected to know if you should be at disadvantage because you're trying to shoot something at
Mhm.
far range. That's sort of one of those things where if you're not really sure how to roll to attack, should you be held to the expectation that you know if you're at advantage, disadvantage, or
Yeah.
regular when you're shooting with an arrow? And so I think one of the things I try to model for them is giving someone time to think through what they're going to do, but then also giving people opportunities to ask for help. I think a lot of us know a lot about a system and are really quick to give it ideas. And sometimes you just need a minute to think and look at your character sheet. And so I'll make sure in my group we give each other time to make decisions and we give each other time to ask for help if we want it. And then there are some students who have a lot of knowledge, and I actually rely on them to help me make decisions about rules. So I might say, "Oh, what does your spell say?" to a new player. And they're like, "Oh, I don't know. I don't have it on my sheet." And I'll look at another student and say, "Can you quick look it up and let us know?" And then the
Mhm.
action gets to keep going, and the new player gets to feel really awesome and cool and do things. Then the
Yeah.
experienced player is like, "I have it. It's on page, 125. Here's the spell." And then we can decide what to do. And so I think in that way, you give each player a thing that makes them really happy and excited. And then the advanced players, then I can really challenge them a little more and maybe be more particular about following rules as written. Like, the rule about shooting at disadvantage when you're shooting super far. So, you know, we'll hold you to that. So,
Hmm.
I have a
yeah.
follow-up question.
Yeah.
So, well, I think you said something that's like really, really important, and that was especially about giving people time to think, right? Because I've worked with a lot of kids. Kids are not always great at giving each other time. Do you have any suggestions for? So for me, I know I have to sometimes do a little count in my head. Let me silently count to 20 before I do anything, because I have a tendency to want to jump in and help. But I think that you were pointing out that there's a lot of value in giving someone the space, to come to their own conclusions. How do you manage that when you've got, four teenagers there?
It depends, when we're all new in a group. I think it's a little more like how when I used to be a teacher, and one of the things I do in my classroom initially was we would focus really hard on procedures and processes and how things are supposed to be done the right way. And so a lot of times when I'm starting with a group, especially when that has a big range of players, we'll be really particular about talking through how we do things and talking through sharing the spotlight, what that looks like. And sharing the spotlight means if it's not your turn, you shouldn't be talking probably, unless someone has asked for your help or someone has engaged you. And for experienced players, that feels hard because you can have minor actions and side conversations and you can do things, but a new player needs a minute to figure out where their stats are in their sheet. And so by being really specific about talking through sharing the spotlight and taking turns, that means when you get to harder fights that are more challenging, people know it's not my turn. I need to wait until someone actually, loops me into this. And we try. We're not always perfect at it. And I think that's part of managing expectations too, is sometimes you just need to blurt out what you think should happen, and that's okay. But there comes a point where you need to read the room and say, the player whose turn it is hasn't had a chance to talk. So then I'll just call out my group and be like, it's not your turn. If they haven't talked to you, you shouldn't really be talking.
Do you find that they're pretty receptive to that too? I mean, I know it's like, is RPG Club, it's not like a class, right? Or is it an after school thing?
Yeah, it's after school.
Okay.
I think that does affect it a little bit. Sometimes you have a day, it's the last day before vacation, and everyone's like super excited for RPG Club and vacation. And then there's a lot of talking over each other, and it's a little bit chaotic, and we all just kind of steer into that. And then there are other times where you do have a high stakes moment and you really I'll give them a couple reminders about sharing the spotlight and reminders about it not being their turn. But honestly, at this point, they call each other out a lot too. They'll be like, it's not your turn. And so then I don't have to do that. I'll be like, I'm just here behind my DM screen, letting you guys, run this club. It's fine.
That's great.
Yeah. So we've talked mostly about, running games for kids, but Tim and Liz, I'm curious, do you shepherd kids into being GMs themselves? How do you go about identifying kids that might be up for kind of the added challenge, I guess you might say, of GMing? How do you handle that if you do?
Well, I think, Liz, you have far more experience at that than I do.
There's never enough DMs. So if someone shows even the slightest hint of being inclined to DM, I will beg them to DM a group because we always need more DMs. I think a lot of it is we give students a chance when they sign up for RPG Club to say that they want a DM. And if that's the case, then, we email them separately and talk to them about what they want to do and make sure that they have a group of kids whose skills and sometimes personalities fit well with theirs. But yeah, we provide some resources for them as DMs to facilitate sort of session 0 conversations and talk about sort of the framework we have for RPG Club. And then outside of that, I try to be super visible during the day. My office is kind of near the library. And so there are certain times of day where kids will hang out in the library, and I try to just be visible so that if they have a question or if someone gets new dice or, something came up in their session that they want to talk about, I'm visible for them to come find me and talk about it. So I guess that would be sort of the initial setup.
I intersected with this RPG Club for a limited time because my kid was at the school for a year, and I was at a meeting where the kids who were planning to run games were kind of giving us the elevator pitch for their games.
Oh, and, fun.
There was a kid there, bless his heart, who is running not just Shadowrun, but Shadowrun 2nd edition. Like he's
doing it right.
Yeah. So I was like, either you have a parent who, has strong opinions about Shadowrun editions or something, or you are a remarkable kid.
Yeah.
Went out and
apparently he is.
Yeah. Yeah, or maybe both.
So. Was it Tim in a high school get up?
Yeah, I wish I could pass for.
Yeah, right.
I have a question for you, Andy. You've done something I'm very jealous of, and that is you've had a campaign running with your family. How did you make that happen?
Yeah,
and what's the secret?
Yeah,
I wish I could tell you. I will tell you that I am amazed at the enthusiasm for this game. It's the game, the players are just my wife and my 15-year-old, and I get asked throughout the week, and it's Call of Cthulhu, and I get asked throughout the week, when are we playing when I have to cancel or postpone. It's like, oh man, well, we got to play again soon. I don't really know what the secret is. That has not always been the attitude, and yeah, I don't know. This isn't a very coherent answer, and it's not very fun for me to say I don't really know. But my family knows that this is important to me, and it's gotten harder and harder as my teenager has gotten older to find ways to spend time with them.
Mhm.
I mean, then they're at that very
Yep.
stereotypical age right now where they are
Yep.
in the room every minute of free time. They're up in the room, texting with friends or whatever. I don't know what goes on up there, but I feel like they feel the desire to be engaged with their parents, and I don't think that they really necessarily have the vocabulary to say that or to create opportunities themselves, or even maybe acknowledge to themselves that they want to hang out with us, their parents. This is something that I'm really enthusiastic about, and so when I pitched, like, hey, can we carve out a couple of hours each weekend to do this. Yeah, I don't know. I think it connected with my teenagers' maybe unspoken desire to hang out with their very uncool parents. I'm just riding the wave while it's going
Mhm.
because I don't know, at what point their enthusiasm may dim. It seemed like an opportunity to connect with my kid. I don't really care what we're running. I don't care what we're playing exactly. But
I had the great opportunity to play in 2 games with your child at the recent Roll for Topic convention, right,
yeah,
last year. And one of those games I did not want to play in. I wanted to play in the game that you were running, but my teenager was there and said, "Hey, Dad, do you want to play with me in this one?"
oh,
Oh
And I
wow.
was like, "You can't say no to that, right? You have to capitalize on that enthusiasm." And I think that not just to share a story, but I think there's a solid point there. Like, teenagers are terrible at communicating what they think and feel. Sometimes, to themselves, right? And definitely to others. And I've learned this the hard way at summer camp, because I've been doing that for so long. Is the teenagers they really don't know how to communicate. So like when they give us those hints of like, I want to spend time with you, or I'm enthusiastic about this thing, I think we just have to like jump on it as hard as we can. And
yeah.
like, how can I amplify that?
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah,
Uh,
I think
guys
that's a really good point, Tim. Yeah.
do you guys find that like 5e and D&D is like the best way to kind of get kids excited about these kinds of games, and then you branch into some of the other systems, or do you feel like it just kind of depends on the kid you're working with or the
Well,
context?
Andy, you ran Savage Worlds one shot at something with teenagers, right?
Yeah, that was actually for Liz's
Was that the one
RPG
you ran
club.
with us?
Yeah.
That
oh,
one was
okay.
awesome.
Oh,
So much
Yeah.
Oh,
fun.
is
How
that
do
like
you
the
think?
Wild West one?
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
So
How
fun.
yeah? How do you think running something like that as opposed to running fifth edition compares for new people?
I can really only speak with confidence about what my kid and some of their friends that have gamed with us sometimes have reacted to. And
Hmm.
it is we have typically run 5th edition, but like a really slimmed down at the table version of it. I mean, I haven't written up my own homebrew version of it, but I just ignore a large chunk of the rules. And I have found that at least the kids I run for, they are mostly interested in exciting things happening, like that pivoting around kind of the roll of the dice. And so the more we spend wrangling with stuff that isn't introducing something fun or interesting or exciting to the table, the more the momentum just starts to drag. So I have run 5e a lot when I have run for kids. I probably could be running something a lot simpler and save myself, having to wrangle with it. But, I'm probably overthinking this. When I play with kids, I have in my mind, like, if this kid really likes it and they want to go home and they tell their parents, I really like D&D, I want to be easy for them to
Hmm.
claim the experience for their own that they enjoyed at my game table. And that means it's got to be easy for their mom and dad to go pick up the D&D starter box or something like that at Target. So I realize that's kind of overthinking it, but D&D's, I guess, market share, and it's easy to go and pick up the D&D rulebook. I would shy away from running something where, like, yeah, you got to go online and then order like a print on demand copy and
Yeah.
send it to a
Right.
shady PayPal account somewhere. So,
Mhm.
am I answering your question at all, or not really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what Liz has to think, because it sounds like that's the group that you ran.
We mostly do Dungeons and Dragons 5e.
Hmm.
And I think that part of the reason is that I think that's what most of the teenagers I've interacted with at least think of when they
Hmm.
think of tabletop RPGs. They think of D&D, sometimes Pathfinder, sometimes Tales from the Loop. So we've had some kids who knew some of these other systems, but most of the time when they sign up, it's because they want to play D&D. I
Mhm.
think that in my heart, I've played enough other systems that were so much, like you were saying, Andy, just like streamlined or a little easier to navigate. That sometimes when you go back to 5e, it's like, oh, there's a lot of things happening here.
Mhm.
But that's what they're really excited about. And it's the thing that they have a lot of people they can talk to about. And so it gives the Kids in RPG Club a chance to connect with more people with this shared thing. And then we have this even bigger community of being excited about D&D together. And even if someone's not in RPG Club, they probably know what D&D is. So, but I mean, I don't know many teens who have played like Monster of the Week, for example. So that's, a whole other system then that, is fun to learn and really effective and interesting to play, but maybe doesn't have the same appeal.
When you mention Monster of the Week, I think of it and a number of other games that kind of ask you to come to the table with a particular genre or kind of a particular story experience in mind that you want to create. Is that something that would resonate with kids, or do they kind of need to start with the D&D and then decide I want more of a narrative experience out of this, so I'll move on to one of these more niche games? Or do you think that teenagers are more than capable of jumping into a Monster of the Week or something like that?
I'd be curious to know what you all say, but I think that kids would be really quick to pick up something like Monster of the Week. Because if you really pare it down, and I don't want to do it a disservice, but like it's really, you have a bunch of heroes who are solving a mystery. And if you start there, and then you know that a lot of kids come in with really interesting, complex backstories, they really want to dive into their character. There are systems like Monster of the Week that really give you a chance to think about the narrative and talking through the action. I mean, we just the other day in RPG Club had a situation where I was like, I don't really care what the rules say. You're trying to do something really cool. So no rule book is going to prove anything that's happening, but everyone at the table is involved. Everyone is spending resources or helping or doing something. And that feels like what this is about. So who cares what the rules say? And I think a system like Monster of the Week or something else might be a little easier to say, what do you want to do cinematically? And then tell me how you do it. And then we kind of go from there. So, yeah. But I'd be curious to know what your experiences have all been because, yeah, that's my little world of RPG Club. So.
I find one of my frustrations with, say, more traditional game systems, and this is with both adults and kids, but when you're a newcomer to the game, I sometimes have to fight this feeling that the rules exist as sort of a big wet blanket on whatever cool thing you're trying to do. Because in D&D, if you want to do something cool and cinematic, well, it's probably technically harder to do that, right? If you want to whatever swing from the chandelier and drop down on top of the bad guy in a cool move, you've probably just stacked up a whole bunch of negative modifiers on your roll if you're playing it like as written. I do sort of yearn for systems that lean into like, yeah, this is a genre where swinging from the chandelier is what we want you to try to do. So we're gonna make it easier. We're gonna create like mechanical incentives to do that. I don't know. I find that is the speed bump I hit with like D&D type games.
In my opinion, the best way to get new players into a game is one where they roll dice a lot and they don't matter. So when I was running for summer camp, when I was running that, it was basically a hack of Honey Heist, except the kids are trying to steal ice cream from the counselors. And so they have one stat, right? And sometimes you have to roll under it, and sometimes you have to roll over it. And but that's it. It's just one stat and one or two, or if you're really lucky, 3 dice. And we have them rolling it all the time for stuff that is really irrelevant all the time. But kids like rolling dice. I mean, adults like rolling dice. Everybody loves rolling dice, except D4s. Besides that, right? Because like when I am introducing someone to the hobby, all I want them to walk away from it with is, wow, that was fun. When can we do it again? And not, hey, how does math work again? Anything that is separating the fun is going to be a barrier for them to want to come back. So when I've introduced players to 5th edition for the first time, it usually takes multiple sessions. But when I was running these one shots at camp, it's like, oh, you've never played a role playing game before. 30 minutes in, you know exactly what to do, and you're having a blast. Okay, and I would actually argue that is probably a better way. It also vastly depends on age,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because like kids is anywhere from, like barely able to tell a story up to potentially 17, or I guess further.
I ran a session for one of my nibblings, and I think they were 15 or 16 at the time. And it was D&D because they wanted to play D&D. It was pretty important for them to try that out. And they were super excited for it. And so I can't remember, I picked up one of the starter sets, and we went through like page one to sort of the end of it for character creation stuff. And it just dragged on and on and on. It was terrible. And I was like, I'm losing them as we're going through this, right? Like they're never going to want to play this ever again. But like I just kind of kept powering through. We finally got to the end of it, and then we got into the actual adventure itself, and it was like, and then everything like clicked, and right, they were rolling dice, and like they were having fun, and all this, the magic started to happen, and I just like was kicking myself because like I wish I'd been like, don't worry about the character sheet, let's just play, and then we'll kind of introduce the character sheet as we're going along. Yeah, and I mean, I think they were old enough and mature enough to sort of understand that enough, right? And like kind of like, yeah, understand that was part of it, and character creation can be a really fun thing, and like can almost be separate from the game itself, right? But like, yeah, just that friction of like, well, there's all these things you need to know, like you need to know all these rules and stuff, but like really when it gets down to it, like Tim, exactly to your point, like just start rolling some dice and sort of see what happens, get comfortable with the actions and like the cadence that happens when you're playing a game.
All right, so Chris, now that you've got perfect hindsight and you've gotten all this great knowledge from Liz, Andy, and myself, if you had to do it again, what would you do differently next time?
For this session with my Dibbling?
Yeah, because she still wants to play D&D, right? So how would you do it differently?
I would ask her ahead of time. I would say, what kind of character do you want to play? Kind of get that done, and I would show up with the character sheet filled in with everything other than the name, like the name and some of the backstory things, and like here's 2 choices for spells, right? Like these are the things that you care about. Like you don't know what any of these other numbers mean, right? Like you don't need to understand this math, right? Like don't worry about it. Like let's play. And then later on, we could be an hour in. If you're like, oh, now I want to make my own character, then we can go back and do that stuff. But I mean, like, again, like, I mean, I think we've all sort of mentioned it. Like, you just sort of want, like you want to hook them, hook them to the hobby a little bit. And then you can kind of say like, and now there's this huge, vast field in front of you. If you want to explore, there's all these different systems and stuff, but like, yeah, worry about that after you're assured that this is going to be a fun thing.
I have a question again, kind of for Liz and Tim. Obviously, both of you are running games with and for kids in different kind of educational environments, at least for some of the gaming you do. And I'm curious, like, to what extent do you think about things like life skill development as you approach the game? Or do you keep it like, hey, we're here to play a fun game, and we're not going to talk about it, how educational it might be? Does that make sense?
I have found a lot of value in using these games for emotional development of children. And so teenagers go through these teenage years, and they are legitimately horrible, right? I mean, we all survived them, barely, maybe. But no, teenagers are so difficult, right? Their body's telling them one thing, their mind telling them another. They don't know how to communicate it. They don't really know. They don't always have the vocabulary for how how they feel and what they think, and there's so much going on, and it changes day to day to day. Like it's really, really hard for teenagers. And I had this one player who was in this rebellious stage and just really wanted to be rebellious. And we talked about it and said, what if we ran an evil campaign? Which it would not be my first choice or second or third. But that player really wanted to do it. And the others were okay with it. They didn't really care. And that player took every opportunity to like backstab and to go against the grain of everyone else. And the way the campaign ended was player versus player combat with the other players teaming up and killing this character.
Yeah.
And I let it happen. And the player got up in tears and stormed out of the room. And I followed him and we talked about it. And at the moment, it was he felt betrayed by his friends, even though it's imaginary world, right? He felt his friends betrayed him. And as we talked about it, he realized that it was his own actions that brought that out. Like every step he took there led to that conclusion. And they were just reacting to him, and in a very reasonable way, especially for kids that age. And they were basically like, he has to stop. We have to stop him. He's going to ruin it. And it let him explore these things he wanted to do in life, but couldn't do in the real world in a safe space. And while, he had a terrible night, he cried himself to sleep. I was able to comfort him to some extent, but he had a growing experience out of it. And I think there's an incredible value when you have a group of people who you can trust to in the end be interested in each other's welfare, that you can be vulnerable with, that you can have these experiences, but you can do it in the safe world. That, like, in the end, it doesn't matter, right? In the end, it's just numbers on a piece of paper, right? You can throw it away at the end of the day. And he still does not talk about that campaign. He talks about our other ones still, but he won't talk about that one. But I think he got some life experience out of it.
Yeah.
I don't know how much, like, how intentional I ever am about teaching a skill necessarily, but I think because we're in a school, we have a framework sort of built into some of the rules of our school and some of the things that we talk about as an organization with students about, what a graduate might look like. Or in RPG Club, we give sort of a framework for talking about being a place that's a safe space for everybody, and a space where we're all playing together, we're all telling a story together. And so I think one of the things that I would hope to see, and that I do often get to see, which is really cool, is students who come into RPG Club feeling uncertain about whether or not it's okay that they're excited about a particular character or a particular story or a particular thing they want to try in the game, or they're nervous about being in charge of DMing a game. And over time, you get to see them realize, like, this is a place where we all really just love playing this game together. And it's okay to be really excited about it. And it's okay to get really excited about dice. And then, we can talk about these things and all share a joy of it. And I think as a result of sort of cultivating that community together, we sort of start to see some students who maybe do start feeling confident to DM a game and do feel confident to come up with ideas and present them to a group, and feel like, if the group doesn't like it, that's kind of scary, but they're ready to try and they're ready to problem solve when things go wrong, and they're learning tricks like calling a bathroom break when they don't know what to do, and all these things, as DMs we learn. But I guess what I get to see sometimes is students who really feel known and appreciated and welcome. And I think as a result of that, sometimes we see students taking really good risks. And sometimes it's risks as a character, and sometimes it's risks as a person, like trying a voice that they haven't tried before. But I don't necessarily set out to do it intentionally. And part of that is because of the time of day. Everyone's been in school all day, and sometimes you come in and everyone's carrying all the things that happened during the day, or you never really know what it's going to feel like. So, but I would hope that any kid came out of RPG Club knowing that they were just really welcome there, and that we all wanted them to be there, and that we wanted to hear what they thought and wanted to hear what they felt. And we wanted to see creatively what they were capable of. And some kids, I had one student in one of my groups who started illustrating the adventures we had, and the student was a really amazing artist. And every Friday I'd come in and be like, man, I hope she stops by the help desk today, because then I get to see what she drew. And it was really cool. And so RPG Club became about being really excited about all the different things that we're excited about, and all the different things that we can share, not just the game itself. So that answers your question.
You reminded me. I have a question for all of you. What do you think is the best part about running games for kids that you don't get with adults? You made me think about this. Kids are so creative.
Yeah.
I remember I collected my character sheets from Shadowrun when I ran it with Andy's child, and I got their character sheet, and there was this beautiful illustration on it
Mm-hmm.
that they were just doing, and I was like, oh my gosh! In this like one shot, you fully fleshed out and drew me your character, who
Mm-hmm.
looks awesome, by the way.
Yeah.
My adults are not doing that.
I remember because I played in that game and I was like, like, what are they doing over there? Like, I kind of was like looking over to see. Yeah, and I mean, I couldn't tell you a single thing about my character, but I could probably describe theirs, right? It's like, yeah, but yeah, to your question, Tim, you're like, absolutely, yeah. Like, anytime I've run games for kids, I'm just like constantly just like blown out of the water. It's like you're just taking such joy in this, in like the creativity of it. Whereas I feel like a lot of adults that I run games for, they always like pull back right before they're about to have like the breakthrough creative idea. It's just like, I mean, that's just part of it, right? Because you learn so much throughout your life that you can't sort of be that sort of person that you really feel like inside, right? Like all the time, right? Because for various reasons. So, but kids just don't have that filter as much, and it's wonderful.
That would be more or less how I would answer too. Again, my limited experience compared to you guys, but when I play with adults, there is a buffer between us and the fun time we all want to have, and it's just that buffer of being old and mature and maybe not entirely able to justify the hours that we're spending on this game instead of doing something more responsible. And it's this kind of an intangible thing with adults that I don't get as much with my kids. Obviously kids can come to the table with their own kind of barriers between them and the good experience, but I feel like kids are just more able and willing to embrace the joy of just the activity than adults are, without as much self-consciousness, although teenagers are of course notoriously self-conscious, so maybe I'm contradicting myself, but
Yeah.
But I don't see it as much as when we're all playing at the table. I don't see that self consciousness as much. I would say I think I personally would strongly advocate for, even if you're like a player who's been playing for a really long time, I'd advocate for playing with new players periodically, because one of the best things about playing with a new player is they don't know that they can't do a thing, so they
Mhm.
might try to do the thing. And I think playing with kids, it's like you always have that. Even your most experienced teenage players, I've never had a teenage player who came in and was like, I absolutely can't do that. It was always like, if you tell me I can't, I'm going to explain
Yeah.
to you how I can. Or my other friend is going to actually help me, and then
Yeah.
this person's going to do this thing. And so I think there's just sort of this general atmosphere of that willingness to take risks and creative risks, but also that, but why can't I do that thing?
Mhm.
And then you get to really think, well, why can't you? And then you can kind of go from there. And it's a really fun journey to go on as a table.
Yeah,
Um,
that's super cool. We need to wrap up at this point.
Yeah.
We've been going for a little bit. Andy, do you have any like final questions that you wanted to squeeze in?
Yeah, I was going to say, I know that we're kind of coming up on our time, but so my last question, I have loved hearing the little anecdotes, Tim and Liz, that have come out of some of your answers. I'm just
Mhm.
wondering, would you guys be willing to share a story of a time that a kid just amazed you at the game table in some way?
No.
Tim's out of stories.
I didn't come prepared.
I don't know if this is an at the table story, but this actually happened last week. My group had a player who was missing, and this particular player is playing a ghost. And this player is not going to be able to play for a while, so we were like, we need to come up with a reason for why they're not here. And one of my players said, well, maybe someone cast the summon undead spell. And we're like, of course. Maybe you don't know where that ghost is coming from. Maybe that ghost was in the middle of, getting through a wizard's tower somewhere in a field, and they just got pulled away because you cast a spell. So it's one of those things where you're like, okay, so it's one of those stories where, I was sitting there thinking like, oh yeah, maybe someone like, they had to go and get vengeance for some wrong that was done to them or someone they loved from when they were alive, and they left to go do that. They were like, nope, cast someone undead. And I was like, yep,
That's so
sure.
brilliant. Yeah.
And I've never thought about how much of a pain it would be to be undead and to get summoned.
Right? So
I
now,
understand why they hate the living now.
so now you get to have this whole conversation with your group about like, oh my gosh, when he comes back, is he going to be mad? What are we going to do? Like, do we have to have a side quest to save them? So, yeah,
Oh, that's wonderful.
it's great.
I'm sorry, I'm blanking.
No
I was going to come up with a really great story. I will share a fun story though. It goes back to like something we were talking about just a little bit ago, where they like, why can't I? And I was like, guys, you can't take a short rest on a set of long stairs. These stairs are 20 feet long. You can't take a long rest in the middle of them. So my entire group got up, went over to the stairs, and showed me how they were going to lay down and take a nap. I took a picture of it. I can show you guys later of them proving to me that it's perfectly valid to take a long rest on a set of steep stairs.
That's great.
You cannot possibly say no when confronted with that.
I said, you guys are absolutely right. I was so wrong. You enjoy your long rest. Nothing comes and gets you. You're fine.
That's amazing.
I had one last question for Liz. All right, so you're running an RPG club at school, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, sounds like you'd recommend that. This was not a thing when I was in high school, right? We didn't have RPG clubs. Is this a common thing? Do all high schools have this now?
I don't know.
Okay.
I think they're pretty common. I think every school has their own dynamic, their own list of clubs, and I think probably every school that has one does it differently. But I guess I would say I think it's a thing I think schools should have. I mean, I just think it's really important that there's all these different places for students, whether it's middle school, high school, elementary school. I don't know what D&D looks like in an elementary school, but I'm sure someone's creative enough to figure that out. But I just think it's important for every student to have a place where they can go, where they see like you, and the thing that you're excited about is a thing that other people are also excited about, and we want you here, and we want you to share yourself with us in really cool and authentic and creative ways. And so I would hope that it's a thing that lots of schools have.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I think I don't know if I had that space in high school at all. Like, and that would have been a very different experience, to have that. So,
I came to D&D as an adult, and I keep thinking like, what would my high school, college, 20s have been like if I had been able to experience this sooner.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, I'm so glad that you're doing that and making that space for those kids too. That's just a wonderful thing.
I do have one resource I want to throw out before we hang up. And if it's if any of your listeners or all of your listeners want to learn more about running games for kids, there's a really great community called TTRPG Kids. It's run by a person who's actually here in Michigan by happy circumstance. And they've got a Discord server, and they got like all social media on the website, and they do like a lot of reviews of indie games and other things. I think slightly more so geared towards younger kids, but some older kid stuff in there too. Really great community there. It's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes too. So, all right. Well, hey, I think it's time to wrap up. This has been a really delightful conversation. Chris, you do a better job of the closing monologue than I do. So I'm going to pass the baton, the football. I'm going to pass the object to you.
Oh, that was good.
Take us home.
Can you take a couple more stabs at other sports metaphors for us?
So yeah. You pass soccer balls, right? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
You don't pass volleyball. You don't pass volleyballs. All right, I'm done. That's all I got.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I'll stop putting Annie in the hot seat. Yeah. Again, thank you so much, Tim and Liz. This was super great. So Roll For It Topic is part of the Roll For It Media Podcasting Network. Our sister show, The Splat Book with John Corey and Kyle Latino, is wonderful. You can go check them out at thesplatbook.com. I just finished listening to their episode about the kind of like OSR adjacent conversation where they were talking about sailors on the Starless Sea, I believe is the official name of the funnel, the DCC funnel that John has run a number of times and now Kyle has run too. I played in it before. It's super great. It was a fun episode. You should go check it out. It's like not quite a review of the adventure, but it definitely kind of contains all their thoughts about like what makes it rule so hard. So yeah, go take a listen to that. But yeah, I think that does it for us. I've been Chris Salzman.
I've been Andy Rao.
And remember, if your players are having fun, you're a great GM.